share that microphone?
If you can hear me, clap once.
Yeah.
If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times loud. All right. Welcome, Progressive Democrats. How are you doing today? My name is Eric Riego, and I'm proudly with the Working Families Party, one of the hosts, along with the Progressive Democrats of America and Our Revolution. How about a hand for the organizers? How's the sound in the back? Can you guys hear okay in the back, or is it a little low? It's too low?
A little mumbly, a little mumbly.
Super mumbled. I don't know. This, I think. All right, we'll wait till folks quiet down, and maybe it'll get a little better. We'll test these mics as well. So we wanted to, before we wanted to give everybody a chance to clap for their for our great candidates. We have really a great slate of Democratic candidates for the 1st Congressional District here in New Mexico. So I know we got a lot of supporters out here. We want to make sure that we hold applause between questions, so we want to give everybody at the outset a chance to clap for all the candidates. So I'm going to start by just introducing them. We have Patrick Davis, Deborah Herron, Jesse Heitner, Damian Lara, Damon Martinez, Pat Moya, and Antoinette Cedillo Lopez. All right, so that is officially the last time you get to applause for them until the very end, just so we can keep things moving. We have a lot of questions, and we really want to give you guys and the candidates the maximum amount of time to really get their perspectives and give you a chance to hopefully make the best decision you can make, not only before the pre-primary convention, but also and who you decide to vote for, to give your vote to. So let me lay out the basic rules for the candidates and also for the audience. We're not going to do opening and closings. We're going to go straight to questions because a lot of what we hope they will say will be, we will encourage them to include their bios and their experience and the answers to the questions that are really going to be around a lot of policy issues. If we have time, we're going to try to do a shorter, those will be 2-minute responses from each question, from each. Any sound engineers behind? Oh, that's much nicer. Look at that. You can tell Councilor Davis is used to having a microphone over there. We have good sound people at the council. That's the thing. So thank you. They're union. That's why. There you go. Hey, where's the union people? Let's thank ABW. All right. So what do you think, Mike? Should we use this one or this one's a little tricky? I'm going to use this one, and then I'll just hand it around, maybe.
I don't know what's wrong with this one.
It works. Okay.
Here.
Try that. Ooh, we got the best of both worlds now. So we're going to ask each candidate to start by singing their favorite Frank Sinatra song just to test the sound. That's okay? Just kidding. All right, so 2 minutes per question answer. We're going to go in alphabetical order, and then we're going to sort of change it up. The timekeepers today are Laura Stokes and Lisa Franzen right here in front. So candidates, please watch them, and they will let you know when your time is running down and when you need to wrap up. And because we have 7 candidates and we have a tight time, we're going to really stick to a really tight timetable. As I said, please hold your applause, and if there's any signs, please don't hold those up just to keep the vision clear for everybody who wants to see the candidate. This podium is a little bit tall for some of the candidates, and it's kind of, so we want to make sure you can see them and get the responses clearly. Bathrooms, there's water and cookies in the back. The bathrooms are right over here to the right if you need them. Please just, on your own time, do that as discreetly as possible. And then we're going to pass around a donation basket just to help cover the cost. This is a kind of a volunteer event, so if you want to contribute to that, that's just for the hall and for refreshments and so on. This event is being professionally recorded, right on cue, professionally recorded, and live streamed. That's where it goes dark right now. It's a live stream. You'll be able to take a look later as well. I want to thank Mike Swick and his crew for doing all the sound. Give him a hand. And as inevitably happens, you're going to have sound and problems and so on. We're just going to roll with it because we're all good progressive Democrats here, right? So what we're here for is I don't know that we're all Democrats, but I'm assuming that most folks know we're Democrats. But I think the thing that is the real focus of this particular event, given the three hosts, Progressive Democrats of Central New Mexico, the New Mexico Working Families Party, and our revolution, is to really try to get a little deeper on progressive issues. And I know sometimes we have different definitions of what that means. Hopefully we'll get some clarity from the questions today and from the answers today. But really, as you know, for those of you like me who are big Bernie fans, I just want to remind folks that Bernie won this congressional district, and all three of these organizations are squarely behind Bernie. Most of us also then supported Hillary in the general election, so obviously we want to have a theme of unity, but we also want to remember that, at least for the groups who organize this particular event, we are really trying to put forward what we believe is the most progressive candidate. I think the first congressional district, as borne out by Bernie's results and borne out by history, is a solid progressive district, and whoever goes to represent us in Washington should be not just a progressive, but a progressive leader who really takes on those issues in Congress. You guys agree, or? So I say that just by way of introduction because folks I think this is an opportunity, one of many, hopefully, where all the candidates will get to say, okay, what distinguishes them in terms of their progressive, not just their ideology, their experience, their record, and what they're prepared to do as a progressive leader in the United States Congress, representing all of us in the first congressional district. So, with that in mind, I want to introduce the three questioners today. They're going to be, we have one from each of the three sponsoring organizations. First, we have from Our Revolution, Margarita Mercure-Hibbs. Everybody knows Margarita?
And it's Our Revolution, New Mexico.
Our Revolution,
just to
New
clarify.
Mexico. Yeah, don't get that confused. Our Revolution, New Mexico, and it's Margarita
Mercure.
Yes,
You got it right.
I got it right. Okay, you can call her Margarita. You prefer Margarita to Margarita.
Yeah, I prefer Margarita, but
Margarita.
not everybody can roll their R's.
All right. Just roll. We have from Progressive Democrats of America in Central New Mexico, Kathleen O'Malley. They'll be doing great work organizing progressives for many years. And of course, with New Mexico Working Families Party, we have our political director, J.D. Matthews. And I want to thank all the groups who put this together. There's a lot of work, volunteer work that went into this. So they're going to be asking questions. So for the candidates, sort of turn your attention to them, and they'll be going in turn and asking questions. The first question will come from PDA, the second question from WFP, and the third question will be from Our Revolution, New Mexico. Without further ado, I want to turn it over to Kathleen from PDA.
Thanks. Okay, the first question is in regard to climate change and climate justice. Our addiction to and promotion of fossil fuels is rapidly warming the planet. The science is clear that we must halt dirty fossil fuel projects. We need bold action now to move off fossil fuels and onto 100% renewable energy. In House Resolution 3671, Tulsi Gabbard's Off Fossil Fuels for a Better Future Act would require that by 2035, 100% of electricity come from clean energy, and all cars sold in the U.S. would be emission-free. So the question is, in promoting clean energy, 100% clean energy, what is your timetable for reaching this goal? Will you co-sponsor H.R. 3671? And if not, why not? And what are your plans to deal with this issue?
Committee Chiefs, may start with Pat and just go straight down.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Kathleen. I appreciate that very much. It's a great way to get us started. You know, a couple of years ago, when I moved from Organizing in Progress Now, we passed with and Environment New Mexico, we sat down and passed Albuquerque's very first renewable energy standard, 25% by 2025. And that was pretty advanced for the city of Albuquerque just 2 or 3 years ago. But then Donald Trump showed up. Lord have mercy. So we went back to the table and said, how do we achieve that without federal help and without Susana Martinez as she keeps vetoing our solar tax credits? So we introduced a bill, and we just had a press conference on Thursday right down the street with Mayor Keller and Senator Heinrich to roll the next piece of this out. We put $50 million for the federal Krebs credits that Senator Heinrich helped us secure to put solar on city buildings. The first $25 million are already out and working. And we did it by taking money out of what we were going to pay PNM for our coal-fired energy that they keep sending to us, and we gave it to local solar companies. 6 local solar companies who promised to hire 100 local workers to put solar on the civic center and fire stations and libraries. And we did it in partnership with CNM so that local kids could get the work and the benefits so they don't have to leave New Mexico to find clean energy jobs for the next generation. That's how we started our piece, to be sure Albuquerque keeps our commitment to Paris, even though Donald Trump hasn't done it. And it's a good segue because absolutely, I will co-sponsor and have said we would from the very beginning. And I'm proud to be the first candidate in New Mexico ever to take the no fossil fuel pledge, saying I won't take a dime from fossil fuel industries, and I'll reinvest the money and ask the grassroots donors to make up the difference. And so far they have. More than 500 people have donated for a clean energy candidate who has a record of working on climate change, has been able to do it here in the city of Albuquerque, and translate it to jobs. And doing that as a jobs and climate position was the way we got Republicans to support it too.
Deborah Holland.
Thank you. Since my campaign started, renewable energy has been actually the largest part of my campaign, because I think that New Mexico, with over 300 days of sun per year, we could be a global leader in renewable energy. Of course, I would sign on to any bill that favors us combating climate change and moving to renewable energy. And I really believe that here in New Mexico, if we had had a Democratic governor in office, we would be much farther along. Every single state building should have solar panels on it. Every single federal building should have solar panels on it. So there are a lot of things we can do to move this forward. I also took the no fossil fuel money pledge. I will not take any money from any fossil fuel industries. That is extremely important to me. And you know, it's up to us to provide a future for our children. If we wreck this planet, we surely have no do-overs, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we preserve the planet for future generations. It's not, and it's not unlike the kids who are standing up right now to protect their future, and everyone across the globe who has been fighting for us to pay attention to climate change and renewable energy. I worked with 350.org to get support from tribal communities to renew or extend the renewable energy portfolio standard. We weren't successful at that at the time. I worked with Tom Solomon. However, I think whatever we can do to make sure that this issue is on the front page, that it's on the front of everyone's mind, that we're all working toward that's what we need to do.
Jess Heitner.
Hi there. My name is Jesse Heitner. I am a gay, vegan Kucinich voter with 2 degrees from Berkeley. And for about 30 seconds, I'm going to appear less progressive than the rest of the panel, because while I am extremely strongly committed to clean energy, and I think infrastructure is one of the only things that both parties agree on funding and needs to be going towards clean energy, solar panels, wind energy, energy infrastructure, I am hesitant to sign on to 100% clean energy by 2035 because my background as a scientist, one of those degrees is molecular and cell biology. I have a degree in data science. You don't get to 100% of anything. That's considered a laughable concept in biochemistry. You can get close. So I think a reasonable goal of 90%, 95, I'm not sure. But saying that we will use no fossil fuels of any kind in our state under any circumstance might be a bit harsh, might be a bit going too far. As an economist, doesn't jive with the marginal willingness of substitution. It's a very technical term. But that said, I very strongly agree with a push towards clean energy, that solar panels should be on every state and federal building, that there should be tax incentives to put them on private buildings, businesses, homes, and that we need to build the energy infrastructure so that that energy can be stored and used out of state, used, you know, when on those few days that aren't sunny in New Mexico. And I will push strongly for that in Congress.
Hi, my name is Damián Lara, and I just want to give a shout out to my mom, Berta Reza. Muchas gracias por venir a acompañarme hoy. So, yes, I would sign on to that. I would also sign on to leave it in the ground, and I would actually take it a step further. Not only would I prohibit and exclude any further exploration of fossil fuels, I would also make sure that all of our solutions have an intersectional approach to make sure that we have environmental justice for all New Mexicans. What we need to do is take away all of the subsidies that we give currently at taxpayer expense to big oil, gas, and corporations, and provide incentives for those same companies to say, if you want taxpayer money, then you can no longer get tax credits, tax subsidies for producing fossil fuels and extractive industries out of the ground, but you can get those for investing in renewable energy infrastructure. If you want to put up solar panels, you can. If you want to put up wind farms, you can, and you can get those same tax credits that you were getting before. If you want to train your employees so that instead of climbing a 100-foot wellhead, they get great union jobs, being electrical engineers and line journeymen, then you can do that. And you want to invest in a smart electrical grid, we'll do that. I have a proven track record of making things happen. As a staff attorney for the legislature, I led a delegation of New Mexico legislators to Washington, D.C., met with EPA and other members of Congress, and we got 2 separate grants, one for $8 million, one for $5 million, to come back here to New Mexico, clean our abandoned uranium mines, make sure we had a reclamation, and our legacy sites that continue to disproportionately affect communities of color and in Indian country. I've done this before. If you lend me your voice in Washington, D.C., I will do it again. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm going to stand up. My seat seems to be pretty short here, and I'm right where the drawers are, so hopefully you'll be able to see me this way. Let me first start off by saying that renewable energy is our future, not only the future for our country, but the future for New Mexico. Right now, what we have is we have an entire policy set by this president, which is focusing on fossil fuels, and that's wrong. The first thing that we need to do is we need to establish our leadership again in the world and tie into the Paris Accord. Now, you asked me about a specific bill. It's HR 3671. I have to say, personally, I have not read that. Before I sign on to a bill, I want to actually read the language. But in principle, I want to get to that 100% by 2035. And I will fight to get there. One of the things that we have in this state, and especially here in this city, is we have some of the best technology in the world concerning solar, concerning wind, but yet we're not taking advantage of that. Most of that technology is at Sandia, and I have the experience to get that over the fence to our businesses so that we can develop these businesses and lead the world in what we're doing. This is where my background comes in. I worked for Senator Jeff Bingaman on energy and natural resource issues, and I also worked for then Congressman Tom Udall as a legislative director. I'm going to try to ignore you here in a second. And so I've been working on these issues already. It's absolutely crucial to our future, not only economically, but to our environment, that we work on these renewable technologies that we have here, not only for our generation, but for future generations. Let me give you an example. Right now, there's technology in this community at the Bioscience Center that has miniaturized a solar panel. You can actually sew it into a shirt. We should be taking advantage of that technology citywide.
I think it's a good idea to stand up. Let's maybe see folks a little better. So if you choose to stand up, that might be good.
Yeah, I didn't exactly get the height in my family. Maybe that's the farthest. Okay. Well, to answer your question, ma'am, absolutely I would sign on to this bill. And I think in your question you asked, what is your timeline? And my timeline is exactly in line with this, 2035. Because this is not only a good thing for our nation, but it's a good thing for New Mexico. In 2008, I was the National FFA president, and I sat down in a meeting with Bill Ford. And I asked him the question, I said, why are we not more energy efficient in our vehicles? Why do we not have cars that can drive 100 miles per gallon? Why are we not doing more to protect our environment? And he said, the truth is we have the assembly line to make that happen. We have the technology. The problem is if people cannot commute the distance that they need to go in a given day, and that charge stations don't exist, the fault lies in who will pay for charging stations. Will it be the automotive companies? Will it be the government? Will it be oil and fuel stations, gas stations that will pay for charging stations? And he says that's where the problem is. And what I see as this is a great opportunity to invest $1 trillion in an infrastructure program where we spark private innovation through public sector funding. This is part of the Rebuild America Act, and I think that when we look at doing this, it's not only a way to protect our environment, but it's a way to create decent paying jobs in America. It's a way to make the middle class stronger in America. So I absolutely think we need to do it with automobiles. I think we need to do it with all energy. We need to also position New Mexico as the one state that could be the model of innovation for the country to be 100% energy independent. When you look at our 300 plus days of sunshine, when you look at the massive amount of wind in eastern New Mexico, this could be the model of innovation that the rest of the country uses to build a base from moving forward. And I think that when we have that type of leadership in Washington, not only will we strengthen New Mexico's economy, but we'll protect the environment for all Americans. Thank you.
Thank you. Climate change is the most important environmental issue facing our country and our planet today. I have experience with environmental issues. I co-founded the Environmental Justice Clinic at the University of New Mexico before environmental justice was a concept that was being talked about. I served on the Air Quality Control Board in the 90s when we set a goal of getting rid of the brown cloud, and we were successful in doing that. I committed to the Off Fossil Fuels Act last year. I think the bill is very important, and I believe in a 100% goal because I think you have to set goals high. I don't think you set a reasonable goal. I think you set the highest goal that you can set. I also committed, as part of the Summer of Progress platform, I committed to all 8 of the bills, but the important one affecting this is the Keep It in the Ground Act. I think it's very important that we stop the leases, the fossil fuel leases, because we keep subsidizing fossil fuels over and over again, and we need to make it more expensive for fossil fuels and less expensive for clean energy. I took the pledge not to accept fossil fuel money and any other corporate money because the biggest barrier to moving to 100% renewable energy has been the corrosive effect of fossil fuels money in politics. I want you to have confidence in me that I will serve you and not the fossil fuels industry. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. So that's the end of our first round of questioning. For the second round, we're going to start with Deborah Holland and go in sequence and come back, and Pat, you will be last. So the second question goes to the Working Family Party, J.D. Matthews.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. We had this issue come up from our members a lot, and it's money in politics, which was just touched upon. The question is, will you commit today to not accept any corporate PAC money, and also, as a show of solidarity with voters, return any you have already received for this congressional election? If you support, why is this important? And if not, then why not?
Thank you, JD. Yes, of course, I would commit to that. And no, I haven't received any corporate PAC money at all. In fact, in addition to taking the no fossil fuel money pledge, I have pledged publicly to not take any NRA money. I will not take any payday lending money because I see how that affects people of color disproportionately and people whose first language is not English. In addition to that, I mean, any other money that does not move our progressive values forward, big pharma, no money, no. Any money that does not align with my values as a progressive Democrat, I will not take. So, so thank you for that question.
Jesse.
I think that's a very important question for keeping all of us at this table and any politician accountable. And as came up in the last forum last weekend, I haven't accepted any PAC money, any corporate PAC money, and I will not accept any NRA money. They're not going to offer. And, you know, I'm proud of our party. They're really not. I'm proud of this table, this party that's, every one of us is going to say the same thing. We're on the same page with that. And it's extremely important. It is not okay for people like the Koch brothers to put, up to $1 billion into a single election and sway the electorate that way. I don't like being beholden to people for their money. I don't, and I'm quite certain that my constituents wouldn't want me beholden to any corporations or influences for their money. So the answer is absolutely not, and thank you for asking.
So yeah, same for me. Is that okay? Are you guys hearing me in the back okay? Not too muffled? Good, thank you so much. So yeah, no, my finance team, all-woman finance team, checks these things, even lobbyists that have ties to personal friends. When I worked in Congress that have ties to fossil fuels, pharma, NRA, none of that money is coming to me. My money comes from my life savings and from people like yourselves all across this great country. So now that I have extra time, I have read both the Keep It in the Ground bills. I've worked in Congress on CERCLA, on fixing brownfields. I've been working on environmental justice since 2001 and throughout my entire career. What you get from me is not somebody who just has the experience working as a nationally recognized congressional staffer in Washington, D.C. on these issues. You get somebody who knows how to read and write legislation, who does it formally, who not only looks at these bills and just says, oh yeah, I'll sign on to everything, who actually takes a look and knows how to go about improving them and how to move things forward, not just on environmental justice, but on economic justice, how we shift tax subsidies so that we can get these corporations like ExxonMobil, Shell, and all of these to invest in electric renewable energy charging stations for vehicles, on electrical grids, on make sure that we move these forward. Thank you so much. Once again, my name is Damian Lara.
The money that's in politics right now is the corruption of our democracy. Right now, what we need to do is we need to reverse Citizens United. What we're seeing is a time period that's like the Gilded Age, the robber barons. There's individuals out there right now, and it's being led by this president, who don't care who they hurt or how much they hurt people, as long as they're able to line their pockets. And that's where we're at right now. So, your question was specifically, would I take that pledge? Here's your answer is, I have not taken the money and I will not take the money. Now, I want to expand on that. As the question was before with the fossil fuel, I haven't taken any fossil fuel money. But also something that is important to me is I'm one of these families that's been personally affected by this heroin opiate epidemic. And so I know that I cannot prosecute, or when I was U.S. Attorney, I could not prosecute our way out of this. So we took a comprehensive approach. Where I'm going with this is when I get to Congress, we're taking on the big pharmaceutical corporations, and we're going to hold them accountable for not only devastating a generation of Americans with these opiates, but we're also going to hold them accountable for the high prices that they're charging for the pharmaceutical drugs themselves. Now, there's Mr. Griego, in starting this conversation, said experience and record, and what you're looking for is progressive leadership. I have this experience, and again, I go back to, as your U.S. attorney, one of the priorities I had was to work on this heroin opiate epidemic and hold people accountable. And here's where I want to leave this thought with you, is prior to becoming a U.S. attorney, I'll have to pick up the thought later, apparently.
Well, like my peers up here, I think all of us stand against corporate PAC money, and I know for me personally, not only will I not accept it, I have not accepted it, and moving forward I will stand against it. And I think this brings up a bigger conversation about who really has a voice in politics in America, who owns our country. And it's not people like us. It's not people in the middle class. It's not people that are fighting for a better country. I don't know how many of you saw it a few weeks ago, but Paul Ryan put out a tweet that said, you know, I love seeing Americans being happy. I just met a woman today who's saving, getting $1.50 more per paycheck, and she's going to pay for her Costco membership this year. And I could not be more disgusted. In the richest country in the history of the world, we have people who are working 40, 50, 60 hours a week still living in poverty, still living at the bottom rung of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where our children are going to school. Our kids are not being successful in school because our teachers aren't working hard. Our teachers are working nights and weekends and staying late and taking their own paycheck and buying school supplies. Our kids are struggling in school because they're living in hunger, because they're living in poverty, because they're in households of trauma. And those are issues that come down to who is really controlling the voice. And not only am I not accepting the money, but I'm going to speak out against it. And with your support and the honor to represent all of us fighting for a progressive platform in Congress, I'm going to make sure that we have people that are fighting for a middle class, that we're increasing wages in America so that people can have jobs that they take pride in, can do them right the first time, and can provide for a family. Those are New Mexican values. Those are what our state and our country is built upon, and you can count on me, you can count on my voice to be standing firm, fighting for you in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. It's an excellent question. I have committed to not take any corporate money or any money that is, any PAC money that is not consistent with progressive values. As a former law professor, I am very concerned about the corrosive effect of corporate PAC money on our democracy. I was disgusted by the list of members of Congress who took money from the NRA and how they voted. I believe Citizens United was wrongly decided. Money is not speech, and corporations are not people. Corporations do not vote, they do not go to war, they do not die. They should not have First Amendment rights, and the founders of the whole corporate form would have never expected what has developed in this Citizens United decision. And until we get a wise Supreme Court that understands this, or we are able to overturn Citizens United by constitutional amendment, we have to pass transparency legislation. We have to pass legislation in which there is no dark money, that we know everyone who is giving to every candidate and every PAC and every special interest group. We also have to, again, working with this Citizens United decision, pass public financing. Pass public financing that incentivizes small donor donations and amplifies the voice of people. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I think this is absolutely an important question, and no, I haven't taken any corporate money. I don't have anything to give back. But you know, money in politics is a problem for us because raising money is hard, especially for grassroots candidates who swear off corporate money. But especially when we're running as progressive Democrats, we also have an obligation not just to take every check that comes through the door, because it's not all corporate dollars that still influence politics. As a city councilor, I ran on public financing, and a lot of you in this room helped me knock on doors to get those hundreds of $5 contributions. And as a city councilor, I got elected. I passed new legislation to expand public financing for future candidates that came behind me to be sure they had more access to it. And so running for Congress, my values haven't changed any. But it does matter where your money comes from. Open Secrets, a lot of you know that. It's a nonpartisan group that tracks money in politics. They just put out a report on our race, and you can go online and read it at opensecrets.org. Here's what it'll tell you. There's a candidate in this race who took $74,000, whose chief industry from donors, they're gambling and casino interest. Another whose top 2 industry donors are lawyers, lobbyists, and finance industry. And we have 3 candidates who have more than half of their money from outside of New Mexico. My report looks a little different. The average donation online is still less than $100. My average top 3 industries of people who report their occupations are retired New Mexican voters, union workers, and teachers and educators. That's what the type of grassroots campaign talks about. As the Democratic Party, we can't be afraid to have this conversation amongst each other about where not only we get our money from, but the people that we invite into the process. Because without reform from the inside, we're going to continue to do this work. Whether it's the Democratic Party here in New Mexico that took $10,000 from a huge national healthcare company while the rest of us were fighting for universal health care, and then they got caught writing the healthcare repeal with Republicans, or thousands of dollars from payday loan companies, while Democrats were working with us at Progress Now in the legislature to deregulate them. We have to hold ourselves, our party, from here in D.C. accountable.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate you all trying to stay within the time. We want to get as many questions as possible. Our next question is coming from our Revolution, New Mexico. Margarita.
Thank you.
And Jesse, you'll go first on it.
This question is about guns and the NRA and the whole cabal of crap. I'm using that word. The most recent mass shooting in Parkland is still fresh and raw in our country. And once again, we're told by leadership on the right and some on the left that we must wait to talk about gun violence. But above all, we should focus on sending our thoughts and prayers to the families of the victims. With that in mind, and here's the big question, what will you do to create positive reform and standardization regarding gun access and violence in our country? And will you commit to signing the Vote Courage in November pledge initiated by former Representative Gabby Giffords? Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I relish the opportunity to stand for this. What I'd like to say is that NRA lobbying has been the open sore on the full frontal disgrace that is U.S. gun policy, and that the diseased pus of words that erupt from them every time there's a tragedy like this, like now is not the time, oh, let's not politicize this, we'll send our thoughts and prayers. They are more stomach-turning and nauseating than any real open sore on an actual human, because those words tear children apart by protecting the gun industry. So absolutely, I will support that bill, and I will go far in getting guns, dangerous automatic weapons, off of our streets. The first thing that I want to do is repeal the Dickey Amendment. I have a doctorate in public health. It astounds us, all of us in my field, that there's an actual prohibition for the CDC to study gun violence. So I want it studied. That's what public health is, what my doctorate is in. We need to study it and find out the best ways. And I think we need to start funding it immediately to find out what the most effective things are. So some obvious steps: a ban on assault rifles. It didn't kill, America didn't go under when we did that in the 90s. It's not going to go under if we do it again. Getting rid of bump stocks. Actually having background checks on every gun sale. There's a lot of common sense things that we're going to agree on, and I'm going to be vocally in support of them. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Just telling them to hold their applause.
Oh, absolutely. I would sign on to the pledge. When we were at the Pipefitters Union, I talked exactly about the Dickey Amendment and saying how 20 years of prohibiting the CDC from treating this as what it actually is, a public health epidemic, was wrong. We need to make sure we get back to that. But there's also things that we can do on Monday morning. Yes, we have to go back to banning the assault weapons. We have to ban bump stocks. We have to ban high-capacity magazines. We have to close all of the loopholes that allows guns to get into the wrong hands. And of course, we need to make sure that we provide universal background checks for everyone. These are just a few of the things that we can all agree on day one when we get to Washington, D.C., and I have the leadership and the experience to do that. I also want to make sure that, NRA money coming to politicians should have stopped with Newtown. And it's for long overdue, but certainly it should have stopped right now. And the fact that our politicians in Florida and across this country continue to stand up to the NRA, and now that they've run out of all options, they're attacking the victims of these crimes. How far have we gone in this country that we've sold out our values? I've lived my entire values, my entire life that shaped my policies and my platform. It is at the core of who I am. I will fight for these issues. I will look them in the eye and I will tell them, never again.
We must keep our society safe, especially our children. Assault weapons must be banned. And this is where my experience comes in right now. When I went to work for Senator Jeff Bingaman in the Senate in the early 90s, I was the staffer that worked on his assault weapons ban bill. I know exactly how the NRA tried to get around his and Senator Feinstein's amendment and law. But here's what we must do is, right now, this is what's changed, is with these butt stocks, as a semi-assault weapon is now an assault weapon, and they must be banned. What else we must do is, like Mr. Lada just said, talk about the CDC. We must start holding accountable the statistics and keeping track of what's going on in our society. And the last thing that we must do is strip the gun manufacturers. Right now, they're protected from liability. We have to strip them of that protection and hold them accountable. Now, if I can finish the thought that I had in the previous answer, when I was your U.S. attorney, and prior to that, I supervised the organized crime section, which means in New Mexico that I prosecute the drug cartels. The reason I'm telling you that is because I'm not afraid to make a hard decision, and I'm not afraid to make people mad. And this is an issue that's going to take as much courage as you have because you're taking on the gun industry. But the right thing to do is we now have to go after those assault weapons, and included in that, I still have time, included in that is the size of the magazines. You have an issue now with concealed carry, which we must fight. You also have silencers. They're trying to take they're changing the regulation on the silencers. There's a number of issues out there. I'm going to go and I'm going to fight for you, and I'm going to fight to keep our society safe.
Over the past week, I've been reflecting on the fact that 3 of the 11 largest mass shootings in America have occurred in the last 5 months. This is an epidemic. This is an issue that we have to address head on. And I don't know if any of you have been watching Emma Gonzalez and these high school students from Parkland, Florida, but I am so inspired by their action. I am so inspired by the fact that they're not backing down. You know, last week we had a group of them travel to Washington, D.C., and it's really sad that the state of affairs in this country, that the only adult in the room is a 17-year-old. A 17-year-old that says, we will not stand for this, never again. A 17-year-old who says, I will not back down from you, NRA. And I say the same thing today because I'm sick and tired of waking up and turning on the news and seeing another mass shooting. When I studied and I got my master's degree at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, I studied education. I studied what can move our students forward. I studied how we can pass comprehensive education reform to ensure that any child in America has the same shot at life, that they have opportunity for upward mobility. Teachers, our parents, counselors, food providers, therapists, coaches, after-school attendees, and now we're going to try to solve this problem by saying you're also going to be an armed security guard. You're also going to be the first line of defense. And that The only person in the world that says the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun is the person trying to sell 2 guns. It is appalling, the legislation and the fixes. This is not the responsibility of teachers. It is the responsibility of Congress and people with a backbone to stand up for our kids, to stand up for Americans, and to end.
By the members of Congress who took money from the NRA and how they voted. I actually served on the New Mexico Intimate Partner Death Review team. And what I learned is that the presence of a gun in a house with domestic violence increases the likelihood of a death, whether by murder or suicide, by 70%. We have too many guns. This is another example where I think Justice Scalia was wrong in the decision about the Second Amendment. I think that the founders were thinking about a well-trained militia and not the right of an individual to hold an assault weapon. I support all of the eliminating bump stocks, reinstating the automatic assault weapons ban, raising the age of people who can buy guns, regulating silencers. I also think that it is very important to strip the gun manufacturers of their immunity from liability. We need to repeal the Protection from Regular Gun Use Liability Bill. That bill protects gun owners in a way no other industry is protected. Every other industry that engages in inherently dangerous activity has strict liability for their activities, and we need to pass that. I also support a buyback program for guns. Our country owns 90% of the guns globally, and we only have 5% of the population. There are way too many guns on the streets, and I think we need to buy those guns back and use the metal to create art and to get them destroyed and to get them off the streets.
Thanks. So, and yeah, I've already signed Gabby's pledge, and I think it's absolutely something we should be asking about. So thanks for doing that and giving us something tangible. You know, some of you know the story. As a police officer, I was involved in a shooting with a wanted felon with an illegal gun. As the head of Crime Stoppers here in Albuquerque, I put together our very first gun buyback programs years ago. When Mayor Berry wouldn't do it, we went to the county and partnered with the Sheriff's Department and took 600 guns off the street. And gave kids vouchers for after-school programs and other incentives to help us get families back together and involved in that process. And as a city councilor, one of the first bills that I passed was renaming our new children's park after Officer Daniel Webster, who was killed by a wanted felon who bought an illegal gun in a fast food parking lot on Central Avenue. I've been dealing with this for a long time, and I'm fed up and mad about it. So an APD school resource officer 2 years ago came to me as a city councilor and said, you used to be a police officer, you talk about guns, what can you do? Because we need a law that allows us to go after and investigate online social media threats against our schools. It turns out that's the same law the FBI said they needed too in order to investigate things like the social media threats that the Florida shooter put online that they couldn't do. But people in Congress, leaders in Congress, flush with NRA cash, refused to pass that bill. And so when the NRA lobbyists showed up in our office and said, don't do that, we did it anyway. Some of you were there to help us do it. Well, President Trump and the NRA says we've got to arm teachers, even though they won't buy them books, right? But now we can tell them they're wrong. The law that I passed was used 4 times last year by APD to investigate and arrest offenders who threatened Albuquerque schools with guns before they got on campus. And it's the right message that progressives can lead this conversation if we're not willing to listen to the NRA and are willing to listen to police officers and students and educators who know what needs to get done. There's a good chance that if you got a call from my campaign to go yesterday to board meetings or today to this, you got a call from a gun violence survivor who's been volunteering in our office to do that work. I'm proud to have their help in our campaign, and I encourage you to come volunteer with us if you care about this too.
Thank you, Eric. Yes, of course I would sign that if I haven't already done so. So first, of course, we need to re-implement the ban on assault weapons. We also need to outlaw bump stocks or any other mechanisms that turn regular hunting rifles or into semi-automatic or automatic weapons. We also need to demilitarize police forces. I think that the current militarization of our police forces has not, it's just escalated the violence, and that really needs to stop. We need congressional funding for research on gun violence. That bill has, you know, the Republicans don't want to pass that because they're afraid of what they'll find out, but that is something that needs to happen in this country. We need to close all the loopholes for background checks and more money for behavioral health. They have worked the hardest to gut our healthcare system, and that is another way that they've done that, and we need to move more money into behavioral health. So recently, with the standing up of all the students across the country, I think the best thing that we can do is we can counteract the NRA's message, and you probably heard sound bites from Wayne LaPierre during the CPAC convention this past week, and the NRA's doubling down, right? They don't want to stop selling anything. They want to increase sales as much as they can, and that's where Donald Trump gets his harebrained ideas about arming teachers. But when we leave here today, you can go home. You can donate $25 to the Never Again to help those kids out there to do what they are doing right now to inspire the adults in the country, because they are actually the adults in the room right now, and we need to do everything we can to support them so that they can do what they're doing.
Thank you all very much. Okay, so we're going to try I just want to remind everybody about the applause. I know we're having some great answers from the candidates, but we want to keep things moving. So please hold your applause. We'll give you a chance to do a big cheer at the end. Also wanted, if anybody has a spare seat, or if you're willing to give up your seat, because I know we have some folks in the back who might want to switch off and get some seat time. So if you're willing to give up your seat for a little bit, please do that. Next, we're going to have our Revolution New Mexico, Margarita, ask what we call a lightning round question. She'll explain it. These are yes or no questions to each candidate. And please, no elaboration. Yes or no, I guess you could abstain if you really want to at your own peril. But Margarita.
Thank you.
And we're going to start with Damian for this one.
Okay, Mr. Damian Lara, do you support the President's decision to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem?
No.
Can you speak louder into the thing?
No.
Thank you.
No.
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 They all agree on something. Okay, so sorry, we're just doing double duty because the other mic was not working so well. Okay, so we're going to go to the second round of questions. I want to remind folks that 2 minutes apiece, and please hold your applause. And again, really appreciate the really thoughtful answers from all of you. Also, please try to tie it back to experience, to your own story, to really kind of not just ideas, but really some ways that the audience out there can get a good tangible sense of what you have done, either your personal life or your professional life. So the second round of questions, we're going to start with Kathleen from PDA. And the first person to answer that will be David Martinez.
I'm going to be a little more expansive about this question. It's an important one to me. Privatization of prisons is the topic. The United States houses 25% of the world's inmates, despite having only 5% of the world's population. The prison industrial complex has a vested interest in driving profit by keeping people locked up. The Justice is Not for Sale Act, that is H.R. 3227, introduced by Representative Raul Grijalva, would bar federal and state government from contracting with private corporations to run prisons and detention facilities. It will also address the issues of mass detention of immigrants. Private corporations make close to $50 per inmate per day. It's estimated corporations are making about $3 billion a year, and we as taxpayers are paying for that. They make even more money because they contract for the prisoners' labor. The prisoners make anywhere between 17 cents an hour to minimum wage, depending on the state and prison. 97% are incarcerated for nonviolent crimes, and the majority of those are Black and Hispanic. So the question is, if elected to this office, do you pledge to co-sponsor H.R. 3227 to end mass incarceration?
Our criminal justice system is broken. And this is where I start from, is my experience. As U.S. Attorney under President Obama and working specifically under Attorney General Holder, we had criminal justice reform. One of those was we stopped private prisons. One of the reasons we saw out there was an abuse of people's civil rights and constitutional rights. Everyone has constitutional rights. And as U.S. Attorney, I actually prosecuted security guards who took advantage of the prisoners. And that is my record. Let me also talking about some of the other criminal justice reform that we did and why it's important. As your U.S. Attorney from 2014 to 2016, and I guess before I start talking about policy, let me add right now, I'm very proud to have been one of the 46 U.S. attorneys fired by President Trump. So, concerning criminal justice reform, I cut back drastically on the prosecution of mandatory minimums, on the prosecution of enhancements. We created for the very first time a program of its kind here at the Pueblo of Isleta concerning individuals coming out of prison, re-entering the community. And also, as your U.S. Attorney, I cut back drastically on immigration cases of individuals who were just coming here to find a better way of life or just trying to find a job. And instead, I put those resources on prosecutions that were important. You heard me talk earlier about the heroin opiate epidemic. I took prosecutors off the line so that they could do outreach and try to do the long-term answer of educating, of preventing, of treating this epidemic. Let me say now, since I've been gone, since I was fired last March, Attorney General Eric Sessions, Attorney General Sessions has reversed everything we worked on as far as criminal justice reform.
There are a lot of things that are a disgrace in our country right now and the direction that we're going. But I think one of the most reprehensible things that is undermining everything about who we are as a society is the idea and the notion of for-profit prisons. If you look at what they did in Arizona a couple of years ago, SB 1070, it was basically saying that if you had the skin color that I do or a little bit darker, they could stop you for any given reason, and if you weren't able to prove that you were a citizen, they could detain you. Now, if you look back, there was a board meeting between Corrections Corporations of America and ALEC, and they developed a plan that they were going to lobby to Congress to pass a bill where they could detain immigrants. Now, for-profit prisons operate just like hotels do. If hotels have 100 bedrooms and they only have 60 people in them, guess what? They're losing a lot of money. What do? They invest in marketing programs. They invest in advertisement to get people to stay at Hilton instead of Marriott. And if you look at the way for-profit prisons operate, they're doing exactly the same thing, except their marketing plan is not on a billboard that you're driving by. It's a marketing plan in the lobbyists that they're sending to Congress. And just like the NRA, Corrections Corporations of America has a stronghold on the Republicans in Congress, and that's why this thing continues happening. And we need somebody to step up against them. We need somebody to say, yes, I will not only co-sponsor this bill, but if it doesn't go far enough, then I will sponsor another bill that ends for-profit detention altogether across the board. Because this is reprehensible. It's tearing apart families. It's affecting marginalized communities and victims of color. And I think we have to stop as a society allowing people to profit off of the destruction of family environments in America. Thank you.
Thank you. I have already committed to champion and co-sponsor the Justice is Not for Sale Act as part of the Summer of Progress 8 bills that I've agreed to co-sponsor. I'm very concerned about the private prisons and how they create a profit incentive in our criminal, and they put that into our criminal justice system. That was not how our criminal justice system was designed. And so to allow corporations to make that profit as they house people is simply reprehensible. It is also part of the school to prison pipeline because we have this incentive for more people in the prisons. Just as you said, it's like marketing hotels, right? And why? The other thing that this is doing is it is actually violating existing law. There is, for example, detention centers. There are 2 detention centers in Texas that should have been closed because they violate the Flores settlement. And what the Flores settlement did is it said that the needs of children need to be taken into account before detention. Why have they not been closed? Follow the money. If you look at the donations by the prison industry to members of Congress and to this administration, you will find that money talks to them. I commit to you that I will work to not only champion the Justice for Sales Act, but I will conduct investigations around the country on how corrosive this private prison industrial complex has become.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. HR 3543 just makes sense. Justice is not for sale. It does. And it's the reason in private prison, it's the reason years ago I ran ballot initiatives with a lot of you here in Albuquerque and in Santa Fe to decriminalize marijuana. And when we got enough signatures, Councilor Ray Garduno, who's back in the back, I saw sneak in, introduced it and passed it through the city council until Mayor Berry vetoed it. And so we're going to bring it back again this year with the new mayor. I think it has a different route. I sure hope so. But I support that because we let moms and police officers lead that campaign because they knew what it was like to have their kid always have to check that box that they can't ever get yes, I have a drug conviction, I can't get a scholarship, I can't get a job. That follows folks throughout their entire career. And as folks have mentioned, over the last administration, we had really made a lot of progress in closing private prisons. In fact, we decreased private prison populations by 80,000 inmates over the last 4 years. But here's the thing. New immigration enforcement means that they're refilling those prisons, and here's why. Because as we used to allow people who crossed the border and could simply return without penalty just for time served on a detention to check their ID, now under Trump, they're not allowing that discretion to happen. And so someone who comes in will stay not 2 or 3 days, but 5, 6 months, or a year. And now they're staying in prisons like in Grants and Otero County, where we're holding them in New Mexico for long-term hearings and long-term holds all under the administration. That's what the immigration enforcement is doing for those private prison industries that Paul and others talked about through that lobbying. That's why I introduced with Councilor Pena our new sanctuary city bill in Albuquerque. And I'm going to need you to come to the city council next month and help us, because we don't have every Democrat that should be on with us yet. But we're going to pass it because we don't want somebody who walks in City Hall to have to worry about signing up to speak at a city council meeting or calling the police when they're a victim to worry about ICE knocking on their door. And just for what it's worth, although I think it's going to cut out, so we'll come back to it. But absolutely, yeah, we'll just come back to it, Linda.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, I would pledge to co-sponsor that bill. One thing I mentioned earlier is the demilitarization of police. I think that has just done more harm than good. And of course, people of color are always the folks who are targeted. I think we need to legalize marijuana and quit incarcerating people for small pot, with small amounts of pot. That is something that can stop that pipeline. I noticed that Celinda is in the audience here. She's pushing very hard for a bill to allow prison inmates to not have their voting rights stripped away from them, and I would wholeheartedly support that. We need to include all of our citizens in our democracy. Coming from a group, group, Native Americans, they're the smallest population. They have the highest number of cases in federal courts. And that's not by accident, because police target people of color. And so I will do anything I could to make sure that the criminal justice system is protecting everybody, not just protecting certain groups of people and leaving others vulnerable. When I lived in California, I volunteered at the California Youth Authority. The California Youth Authority houses inmates from the age 18 to 25, and I went in there every week and taught these kids a writing class, because I felt that when they got out of prison that they should have the skills to fill out a college application or fill out a job application. And I think that all of us have a responsibility to every single citizen in this country, and I will continue to make sure that I fulfill mine.
So the first thing that I told this room about myself is that I'm a gay vegan Kucinich voter with 2 degrees from Berkeley. I later got to tell you that I am a scientist, a degree in biochemistry, and I have extensive studies in data science. What I haven't gotten to yet is that I'm also a Christian, and that is central to who I am. And one of the things that I feel like my party, my Democratic Party that I love as a whole, is failing to do is bring in the Christian community that is so ready to join our causes in so many ways. So if you want to know my views about prison systems, come from Hebrews 13:3, which is continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. Now, one of the reasons that I got involved in this candidacy with so many other great people already in the race is a question of strategy, because I know that preaching to the choir feels great, and it's a great way to get elected, but what are you going to do once you actually get into the room with a bunch of Congress people from all over the country, many of them red, yeah, they're religious right. I'm a member of the Christian left. I'm a proud member of the Christian left. And I can speak to them in their language and talk to them in their terms and remind them, hey, what does the Bible say about treating prisoners? Hebrews 13:3. Write it down. And you know what? They will listen. Not all of them, but that is one actual strategy when we don't have supermajorities to actually get things through the system. Talk to them in their language and make sure that they know what is right by their own value systems.
So if you haven't been convinced by the other candidates that private prison industry complex is a bad thing, there's not much more I can say to convince you of that. Earlier, I think you said you wanted us to relate it to our own personal experience, the work that we've done that actually shows how I've lived my values my entire life. As a law student, I put together the American Bar Association's review and delegation of detention facility here in Albuquerque. Put together about 6 or 7 attorneys and law students, wrote up a report, documented the injustices, interviewed detainees here in Albuquerque. As a result of that report, the American Bar Association was able to shut down that detention facility here in Albuquerque. As a staff attorney for the legislature, I worked on the prohibition of profiling acts that prevented local law enforcement from targeting our communities of color for small drug possessions. As a board member of the Bernalillo County Juvenile Detention Center, I invested in programs and helped deter and make sure that we have intervention, prevention, and exclusion of young at-risk youth from entering the criminal justice system, and make sure that they're not spending nights in detention centers. As president of the New Mexico Hispanic Bar Association, I've worked on Law Camp and making sure that we provide underserved communities throughout rural New Mexico and in urban areas to ensure that they have a pipeline to postgraduate education from middle school all the way through postgraduate school. And yes, as a staff attorney for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, we worked on issues of criminal justice, making sure that we eliminate the minimum sentencing guidelines and laws that treat heroin and powdered cocaine differently that disproportionately affect our communities of color. I've worked on these issues my entire life, and I will continue to work on them if you lend me your voice in Congress.
Thank you, Damian. Thank you all for that. Our next question, also 2 minutes. We're going to start with Paul Moy this time. Goes to Working Families Party, J.D. Matthews.
Yeah, so one of the main goals of Working Families is to make sure our elected government represents the communities and what the community looks like. And so looking at the demographics of New Mexico, New Mexico is a majority minority state, and women and people of color are underrepresented in Congress. From your perspective, do you think it's important that a woman and or a person of color represent this district?
Thanks for the question, JD. And I think that this is a topic that we all care about. Representation matters. And I think along with that, voice matters. You know, thinking about the demographics, one of the demographics in there as well is you think about the generation shift. So the biggest demographic base in America right now is the millennial generation, which I'm a part of. And so we're looking at the millennial generation, which is more diverse than any generation in history. And I think as we look at other things about the millennial generation is you also have the highest concentration of educated women in history. There are more female millennials with degrees than in any generation prior. And so in my eyes, I believe that yes, we do need voice in Congress. Yes, we do need people who can stand for those values. I also recognize that as a male, my pathway, and as a lighter-skinned Hispanic, my pathway is one of privilege in many ways. You know, my parents were divorced, and I saw too many times that my Hispanic mother walked in a room and would speak about an issue and people would turn their cheek, or she would be passed up for a job opportunity. And as her son, as somebody who saw that firsthand, and as somebody who is a male and is lighter-skinned, I also saw that sometimes people would listen to me that wouldn't listen to her. And I believe that with that privilege comes a massive responsibility. A responsibility to stand up and speak for populations that not only look like me, but for populations that look different than me or are different than me, but also don't have a voice. And I think that's also part of what representation means. It means you not only represent people who look like you, talk like you, but people who are different than you, who don't have a fighter in their corner, and that's why I'm stepping up, that's why I'm running, because I believe people need a voice. Thank you.
That's a lovely question. Well, as a Latina, as a woman of color, I know how it feels to be dismissed and diminished. It starts with when I told my high school counselor that I was interested in law. And that high school counselor, bless his heart, said, "That is great, Antoinette, because you're so smart. You will make a great legal secretary." Now, there is nothing wrong with being a legal secretary, but I wanted to be a lawyer. So I went to UNM undergraduate, I went to UCLA Law School, I clerked at the DC Circuit, and I came back and I was able to be a law professor here at the University of New Mexico for 27 years, 8 of them as Associate Dean for our clinical programs. I tell that story because there are many, many other stories. There are stories like sitting in a room, raising your hand, making a point, and having it go by. And then a male makes that same point. And all of a sudden, it's a brilliant idea. So yes, I know how that feels. But there's another thing, even in this race. What I noticed is, if I don't credentialize myself, I've had people say, "Oh, you know, why do you always talk about being a law professor?" Well, because if I don't credentialize myself, I'm not listened to. So that's why I always talk about it. And the other thing about this race that is really interesting to me is that I've also been told, "You're too nice to be a member of Congress." And my response is, "Thank you so much for saying that. My parents raised me to be polite and kind." Politeness and kindness are New Mexico values. And I don't think you have to be an asshole to be effective.
You know, last summer, USA Today did a profile of our race and called it the most diverse Democratic primary in the country, because we might elect our first LGBT member of Congress, another Native member, another Hispanic member, folks with all kinds of different backgrounds. We don't have any straight white guys running anymore. So we're stuck with one of us, one way or the other. However we get there, our job and what I've learned, when Eric talked about experience, what I've learned as being the guy who gets to be the LGBT member on the city council, right, and who gets to run as one of the first in the country to do this work, is that it's our job not just to represent the communities where we come from, but also to be a voice and a vote for the people who need a voice, right? When our immigrant community and our Muslims and our Islamic Center were worried about the way Jeff Sessions and DOJ were coming after to use APD as our deporters in chief, they came to us. We have plenty of folks they could have aligned with, but they came to me because we had been there having that fight before. And we set up those hearings to give them a place to have their own speech, to give their own voice, and to use me as their vote instead of the other way around. That's absolutely the way we have to do this work. At Progress Now, I joined the team with Planned Parenthood and the ACLU and Young Women United, letting women lead the campaign on saving healthcare access in Albuquerque on that ballot initiative a few years ago. We did it because they were the right messengers, and it was my job to back them up with the tools and the resources that I had available. And I'm very grateful to Deb that as a gay elected official, when she was the party chair, she was kind enough to call me and say, what do you think about this? Can you come talk about this? That's how we get to use each other's opportunities and experiences, because none of us have ever lived anyone else's experiences here. We use our opportunity and our privilege and our jobs in office to be elected to sometimes be the voice for our own folks and sometimes to be the vote for that voice that others can bring to the table. That's the real value of a public servant who knows how to deal with diverse communities, and thankfully we're going to get a diverse one this time.
Thank you so much. So it's interesting, JD, because I did a ABQ TEDx ABQ talk a couple of years ago, and the thesis of my talk was, what if all of our elected officials look like the communities they serve? And I talked about, in the talk, I talked about my grandmother, who, my grandparents were products of assimilation, so they lived in Winslow, Arizona for 45 years and worked on the railroad. And my grandmother used to clean diesel train engines with a bucket of kerosene and a brush. And I said in my talk she could keep the trains running on time in Winslow, Arizona, but she couldn't run for office because she would never have been elected. And so for me, it presents an unusual challenge because we've never ever had a Native American woman in Congress. There have been over 10,000 members of Congress elected and never a Native woman. So who do I go to for advice or for support or for anything like that when there's no Native women currently in Congress? And with that thought, of course, if I win, I'm going to lead the ladder way down so that other women of color can come up behind me, and I will be there to make sure that they get in as well. I think the question, though, or the representation part comes by somebody who has lived the way most of all of you have, right? My story is your story. I'm a single mom. I volunteered at my daughter's preschool so that she could have an opportunity, so I could afford the tuition so that she could go to preschool. As it turns out, she was able to go to college, and I believe it's because of her early childhood education. And even though she went on a lottery scholarship thanks to Democrats, she still has a 5-figure student loan that she'll have to pay off starting now. And so I know what it's like to be denied food stamps. I know what it's like to have to put food back at the grocery store line. So whenever we talk about representation, it's who has lived the values that I have lived.
I love this panel up here. I love that Deb would be the first Native American woman in Congress, and that's beautiful. What I also love about the panel up here, which is full of Latino people, of Native American people, women, gay people, that none of us are here running just on those identities. We mention them, we put them out there, but I would never think so little of Deb as to vote for her just because, oh, she's a woman of color, she deserves a vote. No, she's here as a former chairwoman of the Democratic Party. Pat's here as a city councilor and former member of our police force. Okay, we're here as doctors, as attorneys, as people who have earned the right to speak, to be considered as candidates for this position. And you know, God bless this panel, God bless the Democratic Party, and God bless America for that.
So yes, I do think it's important. And before I decided to enter this race, I sat down with many of the people that are here, the ones who would give me the time to sit down and ask them just what Jesse said. You're great. I love your background. I love your diversity. You know, some of us are classmates. Some of us have sat on boards together at Enlace Comunitario. What are you going to do for New Mexico? How are you going to build better lives for the people of this state? And with all due respect, I didn't get the answers that I was looking for. So I decided to put my name into the ground because I do also bring a lot of perspectives. I'm not a single mother, but I was raised by one. At my birthday party, my mother was talking about how she woke up 3 in the morning to plant potatoes in the grounds, worked a full 8-hour shift, and then went to the potato factory at 4 p.m., worked another 8-hour shift, got out at midnight, just to do it all over again the next day. You know, we were talking about the things that I've done to try and minimize detention. As an immigration attorney who works for Edith Calderon, my wife, you know, her father was detained in immigration holding cells. We all bring different perspectives, and you're absolutely right. I haven't lived everything, but I know and how to research, and I'm so committed and so connected to the stories that all of you have lived, the struggles that many of you continue to live. You don't have to tell me about statistics. I've lived them along with you. My mother, my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, my wife continues to live these struggles, and I hold them as part of core of who I am. And I will continue to do that work in Washington, D.C. for you.
To answer your question, yes. Our diversity is our strength. And we must elect people who have an appreciation of who we are and what we stand for and what our values are. Going back to my record, this is what helps distinguish me in this race. When I was your U.S. attorney and I heard about an incident at the University of New Mexico, I asked the Department of Justice to become involved and investigate. And what we found there was we found a system that was corrupt as far as how it dealt with sexual assault. As a result, there is now an agreement in place to change. What we were seeing was the perpetrator was benefiting at the cost of the victim. We changed the system at the University of New Mexico, and now what we have there is we have a system that is going to provide justice for that victim of sexual assault. Let me also tell you, part of my record, when we found out as U.S. Attorney that New Mexico State University was paying a female track coach less than a male track coach, we filed a complaint against the university. When there was a sheriff from northern New Mexico, and he chased down a person that was in front of him in a car, pulled him out of the car, hit his head against the side of the door, and there was a gun stuck in his face, and he said, "Don't you know who you're messing with?" We prosecuted that sheriff, and he is now in jail for 10 years. And let me tell you what our values are. Where we prosecuted this sheriff, this president pardons Sheriff Arpaio in Arizona for stopping people because they look like they're from Mexico. Our values are not the Washington values, and I will fight for those going to Washington.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate you all staying on time. So the next question also 2 minute sheets. We're going to start with Antoinette. I think this time it goes to a revolution, New Mexico, right?
Yes. Okay, this question is about war and peace. This month, President Trump submitted his fiscal year 2019 budget request, which includes nearly $700 billion for the Department of Defense. At the same time, there are cuts to SNAP, Medicaid, and other programs, some of which benefit military families and veterans, okay? What ideas do you have for cutting defense spending overall, and at the same time ensuring that our troops, their families, vets, and the American people have adequate funding for the social programs they need? And beyond that, the last part of this is, what will you do to repeal the authorization for use of military force? Thank you.
I was very, very disappointed in the Democrats, the number of Democrats who signed the authorization for use of military force. What that bill has done is it has put so much power in the executive branch to engage in military action around the world that it is startling. The war powers in our Constitution belong to Congress, and Congress has needlessly ceded those powers to the president. We now have a president that is narcissistic, that is crazy, and that has no respect for the rule of law and the Constitution. It is time for Congress to bring those powers back. I have written an op-ed piece about the Restrict the Use of Military Force Act, which would require that Congress be involved in any decision to engage in a first strike use of nuclear force. And the reason that's important is because a nuclear weapon is so damaging to people and to our environment that it should not be one person with his finger on the big button. It should be a deliberative, representational debate. You should be part of that debate through your member of Congress, and I promise you that I will listen to you before we were ever to engage in any kind of military action should we get that power back. The other, you asked about the budget. $700 billion a year is what we spend. We have 800 military bases around the world. The country with the next greatest number of military bases has only 40. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot we can talk about here, and I think we're all going to find pretty much some good agreement here. You know, in terms of where this comes from and where the budget comes from, this tax scale bill that they passed, right, $1.5 trillion, $1.4 trillion in new debt, and honestly, that and the new budget that we've talked about and some of the continuing resolutions, I think Democrats did a bad job on these. I think Democrats fought the tax scam bill, but in the new continuing resolutions, what we see is the compromise that was supposed to protect our immigrants. We were standing for our values on Dreamers. We were standing for our values on social programs like this stupid harvest box idea, right? All the cuts into SNAP and block grants, public service and assistance. We were supposed to stand up for those people. Instead, we went along with a compromise CR so we don't shut down the budget again, but what it did was increase defense spending one more time with new money into the DoD's discretionary funds. There's a big difference in how we decide about DoD dollars. There's dollars for regular programs and future R&D and personnel services, and then there's the discretionary fund we use to fight offensive wars overseas, and that's very much without much congressional oversight. Instead, we do need legislation. Senator Tim Kaine has introduced it. There are 12 House co-sponsors of similar legislation in the House that require a new authorization for the use of military force that requires benchmarks of to get in before you can go out, to get out before you get in, and new legislation. Representative Ted Lieu from the Progressive Caucus has introduced sort of what Antoinette's talking about, which says that any new president has to come to Congress and have a deliberation before we go offensively, not just on nuclear weapons, but any war that takes our young people across the ocean to do that work. There are ways that we stand up for each other and do that work. But we're borrowing against our future and against the investments that we pay in Social Security, Medicare, and others in order to fund short-term defense wins for big defense contractors. They're not creating anything new that's helpful for us. Modernizing our nuclear force to make them smaller so we can send them on a battlefield in a third world country is not helping us either. And it's our job to say no, and Democrats haven't done it.
Thank you, Eric. So yes, defense budget. It's interesting that as soon as the Republicans give a humongous tax break to the richest folks in the country, that they start working on cutting programs, safety net programs that help people, and definitely have helped people like me. They want to make it harder, right, for you to actually access the programs that you have paid into at one time in your life and are likely currently paying into it right now. And you likely wouldn't need those programs if they would raise the minimum wage and if they would do a lot of other things that would help working families to survive. So, of course, I believe that more of the defense budget should be moved over. We need to give the proper benefits to our veterans. My mom is a veteran. She gets all of her health care at the Veterans Hospital. And she's in a wheelchair today because it took her 1.5 years to get a much-needed knee surgery. And if she would have gotten it when she needed it, everything else wouldn't have given way. And so I know that veterans are in need of the care now. They don't need to go to the hospital and the VA hospital wait between 8 hours and 1.5 years to get something. So we need to move more money over to the safety net programs and to make sure that our veterans are being taken care of. Absolutely. And that's in the form of hospital, housing, mental health benefits. And also, I've mentioned this before, we need to legalize marijuana because the VA hospital needs to be able to prescribe marijuana to veterans to help with their PTSD and their pain. We absolutely need to make Congress make them do their job. We should never ever give any president, and much less this crazy president, a blanket.
Never give him a blanket. Let him stay cold.
All right. Well, I grew up here in Albuquerque, preschool through high school, but on September 11th, 2001, I was a first semester freshman at Berkeley, and you can thank that date and the community of Berkeley, specifically the Berkeley Stop the War Coalition, for getting me involved in politics, where I've been involved ever since. Let me tell you, I was protesting the use of force then, I'm against it now, so I am certainly for repealing this blanket authorization use of military force. So in regards to the budget, we spend far, far, far too much on the military. It is over 50% of our discretionary spending. I'm going to take a brief aside, those of you who see my handout. It's not the biggest part of our budget. Healthcare is, and certainly healthcare should be a bigger part of our budget than defense spending. But when talking about the budget, I think you need to take both defense spending and healthcare spending very seriously if you want to be able to properly fund education programs, Social Security, all the kinds of things that we as liberals want to do. And an important reason that I got in this race is to talk strategy. We agree on a lot of these ideals of repealing the AUMF, of cutting the defense budget, of all the things we've been agreeing on for over an hour now. But I want to talk strategy in that a lot of these work better when we have supermajorities in Congress that we're not going to get. There are only 8 Republican senators up for re-election this term, so we're not going to get a veto-proof majority. We need to be focusing on things like gerrymandering, voter suppression, that keep the Republicans in power when there are more Democratic voters than Republican ones. So I hope we get to talk about that later, because that's going to be key to dealing with any of these budget issues.
Well, if you help and you help around the country and you help in this race, I think we can get, maybe not in 2018, but we will have supermajorities as soon as people start to see the light and that Democrats are fighting just as hard or harder than Republicans are for their special interests. So I want to help make that happen. Here's where my experience actually comes in. I was serving for a member on Select Joint Intelligence Committee in 2001, and yeah, hindsight is 20/20. So repealing this blanket authorization is great, but imagine when this was happening right after 9/11. I was there. I was working for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. We had a meeting. I was in charge of researching and providing the recommendations to the caucus about what this blanket authorization would do for President Bush. After a time when a lot of people sacrificed and gave the ultimate sacrifice to give us that landing in Pennsylvania. Ultimately, the caucus decided to make individual decisions on that, but I'm proud to say that all of those members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus voted against the authorization, except for one who abstained from taking the vote. And here's where my expertise also comes in. I've worked on tax and budget and appropriations. My entire law school career focused on budget, corporate, franchise taxes, state and federal income taxes. I can write budgets, I can help do those things, and I will make sure that our priorities for hardworking families are represented in Washington, D.C. for you.
This president's priorities are wrong. And not only are his priorities wrong, he's undermining the systems that we believe in that hold up our democracy, whether it's the free press, the judges, the Congress. Now let me get back straight to the question. As far as this budget, this military budget is $700 billion this year, and it's going to be $716 billion next year. That's taking money away from absolutely crucial, important programs like SNAP, like Medicaid. Here in New Mexico, Medicaid makes up about 44% of our health care. So what he's doing by passing this tax bill and creating the $1.4 trillion deficit, he's now going to turn around and go after our safety net, which is Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. With our Medicaid, what this does is this pays for the abortions that occur. This pays for the treatment for our heroin opiate epidemic. This pays for preventive medicine that we need here in New Mexico for all of us. Where we have to put our priorities is what he's doing wrong with this budget is he's creating a new arms race. He's proposing 2 new types of nuclear missiles. He's proposing a new type of bomber. We don't need that. We're not in a Cold War right now, but what he's doing is he's starting an arms race. What we should be focusing on is we're in the middle of a cyber Pearl Harbor right now where we're being attacked by other foreign nations, and we need to start paying attention to how we're being attacked in the real way, not making up a Cold War the way he's trying to. Let me finish by talking about this Medicare, Medicaid issue. We as New Mexicans are in a very unique place here, and we have to fight for our health care. I believe that health care is a right. And just to let you know, I will vote for single payer. I will vote for Medicare for all. I will pay for what just came out this last week, Medicare Extra. But the point is we need to fight against this budget.
I think that there's a lot of things that we can stand up here and agree on. And a few years ago, I had the chance with my company, Millennial Labs. One of my clients was the Department of Defense. And what I was so surprised and appalled by, what I was helping them do is to help young veterans secure loans for homes. Because if you look at men and women who fight for our freedoms, who come back, you look at the rate of homelessness, you look at those who transition back into society who cannot buy homes, who fall victim to payday loan centers. So I worked with the Department of Defense and the Credit Union Defense Fund to figure out how young veterans could be able to afford homes. Now, that is coming in the Department of Defense, just as is the idea to expand mental health care coverage or streamline processing claims at the VA also is tied in with that same line. So when I look at this question, I think it's not a question solely about budgets, but it's an issue of priorities. What we can't do in America, or what we're told just 2 days ago, we're told that we have to arm teachers with guns because we don't have enough money. President Trump says we don't have enough money to arm schools with security guards, so we need to give all teachers guns. We don't have the money to expand Title X funding. We don't have the money to create higher wages in this country, but we have the money to cut taxes to the top 0.1%. We have money to pay off and give bids to federal contractors who are buddy-buddy going back to Dick Cheney. We have the money to fund all this corruption that occurs, and yet we don't have money to feed our kids and to ensure that in the richest country in America, people who work 40, 50, 60 hours a week are not living in poverty. And so I think this issue is not only about looking strictly at the budget, but looking at the issue of priorities in America, and I will vote and I will stand to repeal the use of military forces.
Thank you all very much. All right, that's, we'll close to the end of our second round, but we're going to do a quick, oops, we got a spill up here. So we're also going to take a very quick break just to let all of the candidates do a bathroom break if they can. So we're going to do a 10-minute quick break, but we're starting exactly in 10 minutes with a lightning round and a couple of fun questions. So please come back. Bathrooms in the back. Starting exactly at 3:55. 3:55. Thank you.
Yeah, I think they're kind of... Will you not only join the Progressive Caucus, but be an outspoken member? And will you refuse to join the new Democrat caucus that supports corporate Democrats that often prevent our values from being implemented?
Great question. Yes, yes.
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes.
Yes, and I'm not familiar with the second caucus. I'd want to look at it first.
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes.
Well, that was clean. So just for yes on the Progressive Caucus and being an active voice, 2, and not joining the new Dem Caucus. If you want to find out, know about what they do and the causes they support, please look them up. And unfortunately, we have some members who've joined that caucus. Encourage them to not be part of that caucus and the Progressive Caucus instead, at least in CD1. All right. So now we're a little bit behind time. We were going to do a fun question, but I think we're going to get back to serious questions because we have one last round, and we want to make sure we get one last round in here. So this third round of questions is going to start with PDA. And so Kathleen, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I believe since we just started with the lightning round with Pat, we're going to go to Deb for the first long question.
This is regarding Medicare for all. We believe that health care for all is a human right, yet we do not see a commitment by our elected officials to make it happen. The Expanded and Improved Medicare for All Act, H.R. 676, would establish a privately delivered, publicly financed universal health care system. Would you co-sponsor this Medicare for All legislation, such as H.R. 676 or Bernie Sanders' bill in the Senate? And will you study and co-sponsor bills being introduced to improve access to affordable prescription drugs? If not, why not? And what is your plan and timetable to address health care in the U.S.?
Deb Holland gets to go first this time.
Yes, I would absolutely co-sponsor that bill, and I would co-sponsor any bill that would move our health care forward. We need Medicare for all. In America, health care is a right. It's not a privilege for folks who can afford it. Everybody should be able to go to a doctor when they're sick. And I know what that's like. I was a student for many years of my life, and I know what it's like to sit in the waiting room of the Indian Health Service for 3 hours holding a sick child. I know what it's like to have, when you don't have insurance, you have to rely on health care in that manner. During the time I was in law school, I was able to use Planned Parenthood. That was affordable, that was accessible, and I'm against any ploy to defund Planned Parenthood as well, because I know that serves women like me women, low-income women, women who need something that's affordable and accessible. So yes, I would definitely sign on to both of those. And here in New Mexico especially, when half of our population is Medicaid eligible, that means that we have a poor population here in New Mexico. We should be doing everything we can until we get Medicare for all, until we get pharmaceuticals for all, that we need to make sure that healthcare at all levels is affordable, accessible, whether it's at the VA, whether it's at Planned Parenthood, whether it's at you know, with Medicaid or Medicare. So yes, I wholeheartedly support that and believe that every American deserves to have health care.
Jesse?
Hi, I'm a doctor of health economics. And what got me into this race, the main instigator, was this question, because I do support Medicare for all via single payer. And my party does not really have a plan for that. If they think they do, they're fooling either themselves or you. Because as I said before, there are only 8 Republicans up for re-election in the Senate this year. That means we will not get a filibuster-proof majority. We will not get a veto-proof majority. And if Donald Trump is still in the White House, which he probably is, Medicare for all is going nowhere for 2 years. Now, there are things that we can do and we should do to improve healthcare over the next 2 years. I don't hear anyone proposing them. I have several ideas. One, we need to get electronic medical records to be compatible between your providers. 2, we need continuing medical education around opioid prescriptions and pain management. 3, we need to bring down the cost of medical education in this country. The average doctor graduates with $175,000 in medical debt as opposed to $75,000 in Europe, and that'll allow if we bring that down, it'll allow doctors to actually practice as general practitioners than all going into really expensive specialties. That said, I am really for single-payer Medicare for all. Here's the problem with the House bill that's on the floor that I want to support and that you need someone like me working on. The entire funding section is 11 lines. It's fast enough in under a minute. I'm going to read it to you. In general, there are appropriated to the Medicare for All Trust Fund amounts sufficient to carry out the act for the following sources. Existing sources of federal government revenues for health care, increasing personal income taxes on the top 5%, instituting a modest excise tax on payroll and self-employment income, instituting a modest tax on unearned income, instituting a small tax on stock and bond transactions, funding otherwise required, system savings, vastly reducing paperwork, requiring a rational bulk procurement of medications, and improved access to preventative care. There are no dollar signs. There are no percentages. There is no plan for funding this. I'd like to help craft one.
Thank you, Jesse. Damian?
Thank you. Healthcare is a basic human right, and I will continue to fight for that. I, too, know what it's like not to have any health insurance, not to be able to provide health insurance or having, relying on home remedies and lighting a vela to the Virgen de Guadalupe instead of going to medical services. And I actually understand what that means and where that translates to in the budget and in the tax code, where these taxes are going to be inputted. I've provided my entire collection. Wealth inequality is one of the things that we have to take a look at. This requires an intersectional approach for collective wellness to ensure that we do provide high-quality health care for everyone, whether you're a member of Congress, whether you're a veteran, whether you're an urban Indian, or whether you're Margarita living in rural New Mexico, you have the same access to high-quality health care. I have a plan to do that. I have been talking about specific ways that we do this, particularly funding a refundable tax credit for doctors who practice in rural New Mexico and in rural parts of the heartland of America, and moving all of these forwards to ensure that not only that we provide and ensure that we have high-quality paying jobs and careers for our doctors, but also instituting a global budget healthcare system that actually takes the profits out of putting people before profits and ensuring that patients get the care that they deserve. I know what these legislations means, where the appropriate dollar signs come from, including a 7% FICA out of your payroll and taxes, and if you're self-employed, paying into the system as well. If you lend me your voice, we will continue to ensure that, yes, it is a difficult challenge, but you know what? I've said it before, I'll say it again. Nothing worthwhile in this life has ever come easy, and that includes ensuring that we have a Medicare for all single-payer system, whether it's 2 years from now or in the near future, and I know how to get it done.
Thank you, Damien. Damon?
Our health care is a right. It's a human right. So let me be clear here. Where I start is I would vote for single payer. I'd vote for Medicare for all. Like I said earlier, there's recently been a new bill that came out, Medicare Extra. I would vote for that. If we had to raise the ceiling for Medicaid itself, I would do that. But here's the main point, is we have to make sure that everybody is covered by health care that's affordable and accessible. Something that is important here is we have to make sure that the insurance companies do not dictate who lives and who dies. We cannot allow the insurance companies to set pre-existing conditions, such as they did in the House health bill, where they were going to let sexual assault be a pre-existing condition. Here in New Mexico, locally, what we have is we have something very special with our teaching school. We're teaching there the doctors, and when our doctors graduate, they have less debt than other doctors from around the country. We have to support that. We have to support our school so that we keep these doctors here. They can be paid a lot more in other places, and we have to, this is where our community can come together and support. When we're talking about affordable and accessible, accessible means having more doctors here. Now let's talk about affordable in 30 seconds. 22 cents of every premium dollar that we pay goes to the prescription drug companies. So we have to attack there in two different ways. We have to allow collective bargaining from our government to bring down the cost of prescription drugs. One of the other issues there, though, is these drug companies, once they have the patent, they can charge a large amount. We have to put a ratio of how much they put into research to how much they charge for the drug after it's found out.
Thank you, Damon. Paul.
You know, I too believe that healthcare is a basic fundamental human right. To look at the United States of America, and anybody who says it's not, I think is a disgrace to what our country is built upon. This is what we stand for. This is who we are. This is part of our values. And Medicare is the most popular, successful healthcare program in the country right now. So the idea of expanding it makes sense. You know, somebody told me not too long ago, they said, you're in CD1, there's a lot of people in it, there's a lot of great candidates. And I said, yeah, I said, competition's a beautiful thing. Because over the next several months, we will push and we will poke and we will prod and we will strengthen each other. And that competition across the board will ensure that the outcomes for all of New Mexico citizens are better. And that's what competition does. And if you look at the prescription drug industry and the insurance industry, the lack of competition across the board makes some people pay higher prices just because they have a different provider. And I think that we have to fundamentally address that. I think that idea in this race that competition strengthens, we have to be able to apply that same ideology to healthcare. I think we also have to recognize that in the richest country, as I said earlier, the richest country in the history of the world, we have to do more for people who are struggling. I met a single mother not too long ago. Her name was Sandra, and Sandra was telling me that she had taken on a second and a third job because she had a child that had a pre-existing condition. Now, this was before the Affordable Care Act, and because of that pre-existing condition, she couldn't get access to health care coverage, and she was making the decision between whether or not she would pay her bill to keep the lights on or pay the bill to put food on the table or pay for her child's prescription drugs. And I think that's something that should never exist in this country. We're better than that. We're bigger than that. And we can find a way to move forward. And I think that this is an issue where we not only have to expand it, but at a time when we don't have the majority, we have to double down and fight against the Republicans to ensure that they don't strip away our Medicare and our Medicaid rights for so many here in New Mexico.
Thank you, Paul. Antoinette?
I have always been a champion and supporter of single payer. And I have committed to co-sponsor and champion the Medicare for All Act as part of the Summer of Progress platform. It is a human right, but it's the morally correct thing to do, but it's also the fiscally responsible thing to do. Right now, we're spending $3 trillion a year on health care. If we adopted Medicare, and we have 30 million people uninsured, if we were to adopt Medicare for all, we would spend $1.5 trillion a year, and more people would be covered. Now, the issue about, and why doesn't that happen? Why doesn't it happen? It happens because you need to follow the money, and look how powerful the insurance industry is as a lobbying group. And that's also related to my answer to the second part of the question. Prescription drugs. Why? Right now, we have a law that does not permit Medicare and Medicaid to negotiate for better prices for prescription drugs. Why? Follow the money. It's the impact of the big pharma on our Congress. I think it's really important that we repeal the law that doesn't permit Medicaid and Medicare to buy prescription drugs and to negotiate for better prices. I also think that it's important to allow imports from Canada, because we also have a law that doesn't permit any wholesaler in the United States from importing prescription drugs from Canada. Again, why don't we do that? Follow the money, right? Follow the money. And so I would very much support Medicare for all. I also have a problem with the Medicare Extra. Medicare Extra is an insurance company supported bill that keeps them making profits. Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much. All right, Pat, you get the last word on this one? Is there a last question, or No, we've got 2 more. Hang in there. Thank you guys for hanging in there.
We're good.
2 more questions after this.
So, getting back to the question that we sort of asked, absolutely. We've already taken the pledge to support HR 676, Medicare for All pledge. And it's something that's important for all of us. You know, only of all the candidates here who support some version of universal health care, sort of how we get there, we talked about specifics, does matter. I'm proud that of everybody who's endorsed this here, that our campaign are the only endorsement from Demand Universal Health Care. It's that Bernie spinoff of folks that we're focusing on that from around the country. Because we don't just talk about, as sort of Jesse said, talk about the value, but really what is the strategy for getting there? Where does the money come from, and how do we get organized, and who has the experience that's done the work? I founded Progress Now, starting for universal health care against the ACA, although that's ultimately what we keep getting through Congress. It's what started our work as a community organizer for me. But when you ask also about prescription drugs and what can you do, we haven't heard a lot of new ideas today, but here's one, and it's one that's making moves in progressive circles. For any drug company that asks for public help to manufacture and to research and create a new public drug, they're prohibited from getting profits from Medicare, Medicaid, or the VA system in return. Too many drug companies use public dollars and then charge Americans far too much. Yet, countries like Canada have rules that prohibit them from charging too much, and so they push that research dollar back on the American taxpayer or back on the American prescription payer. There are rules and tools that we have available in having this conversation that that allow us to invest in American companies for innovation and still lead the medical field without bankrupting our people and our individual folks. Right now, we have to work towards getting healthcare, detaching it from employment, because our corporations cannot make decisions about what kind of health care we need as individual Americans. It's an economic equalizer for all of us to have that access and choose the job we want based on our skill, not based on our health care.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you all for your concise answers. We encourage you to 2 more. Keep them short and sweet and to the point. The next question will begin with Jesse and is from J.D. Matthews from Working Families.
Thank you. So immigration is one of the most discussed issues, and I think everyone has pretty much taken an equal position for the most part up there. But I want to ask a more personal question about your deep commitment. If federal immigration officials attempt to deport undocumented immigrants from your community, will you directly intervene and advocate with federal officials to stop those deportations?
So, yes. I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to circle back to that. I have to say just a little more about healthcare. It's what I do. I've given my life to making sure that healthcare can be improved and provided for people around the globe who could not afford it. I've worked in multiple countries, in the poorest places in those countries, to do that. So I have no plans to cut Medicare or Medicaid. I want to improve them. I'm not against Medicare for All. I'm strongly for it. I'm just honest with you because I'm an honest person. I'm not going to promise you a moon that I can't give you. Not for 100% clean energy by 2035, not for Medicare for All this year. I'm just going to be honest with you guys about what I think is achievable, and I'm going to fight for it so hard. That said, I'm going to fight against deportation. And from a strategic and Christian perspective, it's the right thing to do. The Bible tells you to love your neighbor. I've read the Bible. I've looked at a map of North America. I'm pretty clear that Mexico is our neighbor. And I think it's important that Christians in the Bible Belt who are really upset about all the Mexicans coming over and other Hispanic persons be reminded of that. And when you phrase it that way, not all of them will listen. Actually, many of them won't. But we are pretty close to a majority in Congress. We need to sway a handful of people that can be swayed to come over to our side, and using the right language to intervene, to argue with Congress and people across the country. That's what we need to do to be successful.
Thank you, Jesse. Damian?
Yes, and I do that almost every day now, including working with ICE officials to acquire bonds and secure bonds to release detainees from deportation right now. And my wife has dedicated her life to doing that as well. We've lived it every single time in life. I've worked on Congress convincing those few members who are rational to actually do the right thing. I've worked in Congress to restore food stamps benefits to immigrants who are here legally. I've worked on health care. I am the only, to my knowledge, the only congressional staffer who has national recognitions in this bunch for the work that I did to actually expand and ensure healthcare access to unserved and underserved communities all over this country, much like those that look just like rural New Mexico. I know it's difficult. I know how to convince members of Congress who are Republican, who have different perspectives from me. I was elected the vice chair for the assessors affiliate by 33 independently elected county assessors who are about half Republican and who are half Democrats, because they know that I have the real world practical experience on looking at a problem, doing the research, and doing the work to find and actually write the legislation to resolve those problems and make the lives of hardworking New Mexicans better. New Mexico has now been recognized, and the legislature has been given an award for the work that it did, that I helped write 6 pieces of legislation in this state. New Mexico has one of the best property tax code systems in the country as a result of that. I know how to get the work done. I've done it before in Congress, at our state legislature. I can do it again.
Thank you. Damon?
The answer to your question is I've already been intervening as much as I can to campaign. If you're following us on social media, you know that we're talking about the Dreamers and what's going on. This is where my background uniquely situates me to be able to do this. I've worked in this area as far as immigration prosecutions. I told you earlier that when I was U.S. Attorney, I drastically cut back on the number of prosecutions directly affecting those people who were coming here just for a better way of life or for a job. Let me tell you how this experience helps and how I can fight in Congress uniquely for this situation. Is first of all, the Dreamers. One of the things that we're seeing there, or one of the things that we know in our community, is it's pushing people into the shadows. Right now, there are women who are going through domestic violence abuse or domestic violence, but they're afraid to come forward because they're afraid that they will be, or their family members will be deported. That is wrong. Let me also tell you from my experience, when, I'm sorry, I have to ignore you. When I was U.S. Attorney, 2 weeks into my job, we had to determine that Mayor Barry was not holding the senior leadership at the police department accountable. in enforcing the laws. The DOJ came in, and so we now have in place an agreement that is changing the system. And let me repeat that. We changed the system at APD, which means that the police department is now working towards community and constitutional policing. I know, having been part of it, that we cannot turn our officers, our APD officers, into immigration officers. That's wrong, and I can articulate why it's wrong. And I'll fight for that in Congress.
Thank you, Damon. Paul?
A few months ago, well, several months ago, I had continued to feel this conviction and sense of responsibility weigh on me. You know, as a farm boy from central New Mexico who got a scholarship from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that paid for me to go to Notre Dame, that paid for me to go to Harvard, and having the opportunity to serve as student government president at Harvard, I feel a deep sense of conviction to make this community better. And when I turned on the television a few months ago and saw that President Trump had repealed DACA, I openly wept. It was the last straw. These are kids who I grew up with, people who came here to the United States seeking a better life, people who are no different than I am, who were born maybe a few hundred miles south. And when that Albuquerque Journal cartoon came out, I thought it was despicable. And I was in my truck when I picked up the newspaper and I recorded a video on my camera, and I got 120,000 views, 130,000 views of people and a few thousand comments. And what a lot of people didn't see is the number of hate mail messages that I received. People would read the comments and say, I don't know how you keep doing this. These people are angry. And I said, you don't see the bad ones because Facebook actually filters the ones that are cursing, but I still see them. And people telling me to go build the wall, people telling me to go stand on the other side, and they say, how do you keep doing this? And I said, because the only reason I'm here is to stand up and be a voice for people who will never have one. And recognizing that there are so many people who seek a better life, who are the best and brightest, who don't have criminal records, who are not living off the government, who are seeking a better life for their children and their children's children and every generation to come after, and to turn around and tell them to go back to a place that they never knew, it's despicable. And I will never stop fighting, and I will never stop speaking out. And you can count on me that if these deportations ever happen in this community, that I will be on the front lines, I will be there in the face of it all, and I will stand up and end for-profit detention centers and end any legislation that tries to deport Americans.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Antoinette.
Thank you for that question. I have already stood up for immigrants. When this president was selected by the Electoral College, or appointed by the Electoral College, I was the executive director of Enlace Comunitario, and ICE started showing up in the courthouses. So what I did is I got all of the domestic violence and the sexual assault agencies throughout the state organized, and we asked the New Mexico Supreme Court to stop letting ICE detain people at the courthouses. It is an access to justice issue. Our clients were afraid not only of getting the restraining orders they needed, but of testifying at the criminal and civil trials of their abusers. I have also supported the very brave churches that have offered sanctuary to people who are in this country and being threatened with deportation. I have trained people on the New Mexico Justice app. If you're not familiar with it, it's an ACLU app, and what it does is it takes a video of what's going on and sends it directly to the ACLU. And you want to do this if you're ever involved with ICE agents, because they are so poorly trained that they almost always violate an individual's rights when they're trying to detain people. I have also written a letter to the editor when Sessions, and he continues to make these threats, to punish sanctuary cities. It is very clear that those threats and following through with those threats violates the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment basically says that the states cannot be forced to do the work of the federal government. And that letter to the editor got a lot of attention and was used to make these arguments. I plan to have the most effective Congressional Services Office, and I personally will advocate for the wrongful detention of our immigrant communities.
Thank you, Antoinette. Pat?
So, Eric started by asking us to talk not about what we might do if we get elected to Congress, but to focus today on what we have done. And so let me give you my record. When Jeff Sessions threatened Albuquerque with taking away our federal funding, I passed a new law in Albuquerque. Clarissa Pena and I drafted legislation. Every Democrat voted for it. Some of the Republicans had a last-minute thing or something and didn't show up. But we passed it, and R.J. Berry signed it and said, we're not going to allow to use city dollars for any type of immigration deportation support. And then he signed a letter to Jeff Sessions and said, we're here to help you. And they did. And we don't have to disparage each other, but I do want to disagree with Damon because I appreciate the fact that he doesn't want APD to be deporters, but the fact is his office, part of the argument from the city and with immigration groups is his office continued to prosecute people that ICE agents in our courthouses picked up, despite the fact that our security officers were prohibited from helping them do that work. And our police officers under Mayor Berry continued to turn them over to ICE, and they continue to be prosecuted. And that's a challenge that we have to overcome. But, some of you remember Alan Lay running against Martin Heinrich. He runs a big aviation company. He has $20 million in aviation contracts from the Department of Homeland Security to deport immigrants from the United States back to their home countries. Last year, I used that law that we passed to add an amendment to his economic development bill where he was requesting $500,000 of our taxpayer dollars to expand his air fleet to deport people and make Albuquerque a deportation hub. I used that law to add an amendment that prohibited us from using city dollars to help him move one body out of the city of Albuquerque. Today, they still haven't built their place because they don't have the public help to do it. That's how we pass legislation as progressives that stand up, that fight back, and we put our progressive values into action. And now I'm really proud that since they found that stupid loophole that allowed us to continue to prosecute people that our police officers were turned over to ICE, Clarissa Pena and I have introduced new legislation, real sanctuary city legislation, that we'll take up next month and Tim Keller will sign to keep ICE out of city hall and police departments for the rest of Albuquerque's tenure.
Thank you, Pat. Deborah?
Thank you, Eric. So, of course, our country was built on immigration, and I have to, as a Pueblo woman, we were the first folks who welcomed the Spanish into the Southwest when they got here in the late 1500s, and if it wasn't for us, y'all might have had a hard time eating, I'm just saying. So I am strong on immigration. I believe in it. As a Native woman, I think we need to welcome people to where we are and help them find their way and help them find a way to be successful here. If you look at the Trump immigration policies, the wall, the Muslim ban, killing DACA, those are all racist policies, and that's probably why Amnesty International deemed him one of the worst leaders in the entire world. And I feel like Trump and the Republicans don't understand that the immigration laws are actually civil laws. They're not criminal laws. So by virtue of people coming across the border or coming into our country without the proper documentation, it doesn't mean that they need to be thrown in jail immediately. It means that we need to find them the legal help they need. And speaking of legal help, it's so expensive, and it's too expensive. Anyone who wants to come to this country and become a citizen, we should have reasonable laws for them to find a way to do that. It shouldn't cost tens of thousands of dollars for them just to find a lawyer, or the complicated paperwork that is so unruly that it's difficult to get it done. But yes, in answer to your question, JD, I would be on the front lines. When the Albuquerque Journal published that horrible cartoon that everybody just found so distasteful, I was on the front lines making sure that I stood with the dreamers. So.
Thank you, Deborah. I think we got everybody for that round. Okay, this is the last of the long questions, and this one's for Our Revolution New Mexico and Margarita. And thank you all for hanging in there, and then we'll wrap up after this one.
Okay, this is about our largest demographic of people in CD1, which is women. And so another woman thing. When it comes to patriarchy, misogyny, and economic inequality, women, as the largest demographic in District 1, have been on the front lines of these struggles for far too long. The Me Too movement just basically highlighted every systemic abuse throughout our country. Whether it's reproductive rights or financial parity, the progressive community is demanding that our candidates recognize the patterns of abuse, the history, and the economic and political impacts for women by pushing and adopting substantive policies and rules to address these systemic abuses. What will you do to ensure that women can fully participate in their autonomy as equal members of our society with regards to the $15 minimum wage, ERA, sexual harassment, and will you support and commit to the Reproductive Rights Each Woman Act 2017? Thank you.
I think Damian's first on this one.
Yes, I will. Masculine misogyny is a huge problem in this country. I've seen it firsthand as the youngest of four of a single mother. I've seen it as the younger brother of an older sister. Reproductive justice is a basic human right that we need to continue to fight for. And you're absolutely right, Margarita. $15 an hour is great if you're, a young professor or a young student, college student, but $15 an hour is not enough if you're the single mother of four to do that. And a minimum wage currently doesn't include people with disabilities, people who are tip earners and commission earners, or people like my mother and I who were working on small farms as migrant farm workers. Those also need to be expanded. An intersectional approach also needs to talk about not just being a woman, but just being a woman of color. Doesn't just need to talk about being a woman, but being a woman who has income insecurity and ensuring that we have wealth inequality that is addressed here. A budget and a tax plan that does that, and a health plan that also ensures that you're covered all of your, whether it's minimum hygiene products or clean access to affordable abortions. And yes, that is a complex decision that should only be made by a woman with her faith, in consultation with her doctor or her family, not by career politicians who are 3,000 miles away. I've seen these. My aunt had to suffer these things to make a decision. I've seen my sister have to struggle with childcare in these decisions. We need to provide these opportunities for every American to live the American dream, much like my mother did, much like I did. And I will ensure that we have universal health care, that we have equal pay for equal work, and that we have reproductive justice for all women.
Thank you, Damian. Damon?
Thank you. Let me start out by saying that I am pro-choice. No woman should ever be told how, when, or if she becomes a parent. I don't have, as a man, someone telling me what I should do with my body, and no woman should ever have anybody telling her what she should do with her body. In addition to being pro-choice, I'm pro-reproductive freedom and pro-reproductive justice. Reproductive rights include include civil rights and health care. Right now, what is in jeopardy, literally, is our system because of what they're doing, and they're trying to come back to this through this tax bill. They're going to put in jeopardy our Medicare, Medicaid. What this means is abortion, which is paid through the Medicaid. I go back to my record as U.S. Attorney. Excuse me. As U.S. Attorney, I worked with the FBI and the U.S. Marshal Service and the community stakeholders to keep our abortion clinics open. There's a law called the FACE Act, and we made sure that everybody knew how to keep safe and how to keep the clinics open. Concerning the $15 minimum wage, I want to get there, and I want to work with small businesses on how to get there. One of the things that's important about that is we need to sit back and realize, why aren't we there? what we have seen over the decades is that large
Thank you.
corporations
Thank you, Damon. Thank you.
have kept us from getting there.
Thank you. Paul.
You know, sometimes I jokingly tell people that I don't know if my mother was expecting me to come out of the womb as a little girl, but she was ready to raise me as a feminist. Because the things I learned as a little kid, you know, I'm sick and tired of hearing politicians step up and say, you know, I want to stand up for women's rights because I have a daughter and I would never want something like this to happen to her. And it's like, you don't need to have a daughter to recognize that women are humans. That shouldn't be your sole reason for fighting for it because you have a little girl at home. You should fight for it because women are humans. And we need to fight for pay equity. The fact that women are making 79 cents on the dollar for every dollar a man makes is reprehensible. The fact that Hispanic women are making 54 cents is an absolute national disgrace. So I think we need to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act. We also need to stand up and expand and protect women's rights and reproduction rights. And that includes funding for Title X, that includes Planned Parenthood, that includes anything that pushes forward women's health care. Those are fundamental aspects of what we need to do as a society. When we look at other issues that are affecting women, that are also affecting families, we need to expand things like the WIC program to ensure that pregnant women and mothers and infants have access to the nutrition that they need so that they and their children can lead healthy lives. When you look at the national average for childcare in America being $16,200, we need to do more to provide affordable healthcare options for single mothers. Because what that does is it creates dynamics where it doesn't make sense and women can't afford to work. Because after you take out taxes and what they're paying in childcare, it doesn't make sense and therefore eliminates opportunity for upward mobility. And so I want to be a voice. I want to stand up and I want to fight for paycheck fairness and I want to fight to expand and protect access. I want to expand the WIC program. I want to ensure that women have affordable child care options so that they can have upward mobility in our society.
Thanks, Paul. Antoinette?
I have a long track record on women's rights. I started writing about reproductive rights in the 80s before it was part of the Democratic Party's platform. I have been president of the Southwest Women's Law Center, whose core values are reproductive justice, economic justice, and educational parity. I have headed a domestic violence agency with the mission of eliminating domestic violence in central New Mexico, and we incubated a sexual assault agency. I am also a domestic violence and sexual assault survivor, so I really understand these issues. I have already committed to co-sponsor and champion the Equal Access to Reproductive Rights Act of 2017 as part of the Summer of Progress platform. I also support the Paycheck Fairness Act because it builds on the Equal Pay Act, and we need to build on the Equal Pay Act in order to move the needle on this issue. The statistics you pointed out are absolutely true, and we need to move the needle. The minimum wage, the Raise the Minimum Wage Act is very, very important because most of the low-wage earners, the majority of them are women. So it would give women a raise, and that alone would move the needle. The Medicare for All Act is very important because it includes reproductive services for all women. I would also support the Paid Family Leave Act, because we don't support the role of mothers and fathers in our society. We are one of the only industrialized nations that do not do that, and I think it's time that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
Thanks again. And I think we're going to find a lot of agreement here, but I want to acknowledge as the guy that I think Devin and Antoinette have the right experience and the right platform here, and I want to make the commitment that we did at another forum here and say, if I'm elected, I want this to be our kitchen cabinet for policy for all of us, and I hope we'll pass that along to each other and reciprocate for each other, no matter who is, because there are a lot of good ideas up here, and nobody should claim to have absolutely the right experience or absolutely every experience or idea. But I agree, abortion rights are not just healthcare rights. 100% in favor of 100% pro-choice, but also they're not healthcare rights, they're economic justice issues, as Damon brought up. This is about not just women, but women and their partners and their families choosing when to get a job, what type of job to get, when to have a family, and what type of job they have. That's sort of automatic for me sometimes, but it's not automatic for everybody, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have to be. Gun violence prevention legislation is incredibly important for equality and access for women, for domestic violence victims who are disproportionately women, LGBT folks, and people of color who impact their ability to go to work and raise a family and provide a stable life for themselves. HR 15 raises the wage act to $15 by 2020 because in New Mexico it costs $15.35 an hour to get a 2-bedroom apartment and a way to get to work. And if you don't have it, you rely on public assistance, and that is less demeaning and less opportunity for you and your family. And so we should step up and do that work, not just for women, but for every family. And I'm really proud in the city of Albuquerque to do what I can on our part. I've introduced new amendments to expand the sick leave ordinance that's been introduced to be sure that it's applicable to every family, not just families who work for multinational big corporations with big numbers of employees. And, you know, I agree with Councilor Diane Gibson has a great bill that Congress should copy that requires every federal contractor to show their disparity between men and women on their payrolls if they want a federal contract. It's a model for cities around the country, and it's one I'd be proud to bring Diane and others to Congress to champion as well.
Thank you, Pat. Deb?
Thank you. Yes, Margarita, I would definitely support every single thing you said, and I too have signed on to the reproductive rights bill in the Summer of Progress pledge, and I did that actually a long time ago. My record shows that I have stood up for women's rights for a long, long time. That's why I was endorsed by NOW, the National Organization for Women. I've also been endorsed by progressive champion Pramila Jayapal, who fights tooth and nail for women's rights. And if you don't know that, look on YouTube because she's a great person to watch. And as well as strong women leaders here in New Mexico, Patricia Roybal Caballero and Debbie Armstrong. I was on the front lines fighting the late-term abortion bill in 2013 when the Republicans tried to pass that ordinance right here in Albuquerque. And in the process, helped to elect pro-choice woman Diane Gibson to the city council. I always show up. I always show up. I show up when Planned Parenthood asks me to come. I show up for their rallies, for their marches, for their phone banks. I show up when nobody's looking because that's what's needed. We have to be on top of this issue and we have to fight for the things that we need. I'm a graduate of Emerge New Mexico, the Democratic Women's Political Leadership Training Program that trains pro-choice women to run for office. I'm a proud member of that. And have worked very, very hard to make sure that other Democratic women get into office. We have to lead the ladder down. We have to help other women come up behind us because these issues are so important, and I will always be on the front lines fighting for those. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. Jesse?
Well, first question, last question. I get to be slightly different than the rest of my colleagues. Let me tell you our extremely large areas of agreement. I am for women's rights as human rights. I think we need to be focusing on testing the backlog of rape kits that are prevalent here and around our country. I think we need to be addressing domestic violence, which is the #1 police call here in the state, to my understanding. I think we need paid maternal leave. It's ridiculous that as the highest GDP country in the world, we don't have that. We need good maternal and prenatal care for our children and for the mothers of those children. Now, I am a Democratic Christian. You'd think it'd be the one area where I disagree, with my party and leave my party, but I believe abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, because I find that that approach is a better approach at being pro-life, which deep down, as a vegan pacifist against the death penalty, deep down, I would love there to be no abortions in the US, and we can't do that right now. I know the numbers. I'm a public health doctor. Planned Parenthood prevents more abortions than it performs. And the Republicans and the religious right need to be told that. They need to be told that by a Christian doctor, and even then most won't believe it, but those are the numbers, okay? I know that restricting access only inspires do-it-at-home, do-it-yourself abortions, which are horrific and unsafe, and no Christian should be making those happen. So I am a pro-life Christian Democrat because Democrats are better at being pro-life. I want abortion safe, legal, and rare.
Thank you all. All right, we have one last lightning round question. I know we need to wrap up. Thank you guys for hanging in there. Before we give everybody a chance to sort of be thanked, I want to turn it over to PDA for one last yes or no, no abstentions, please, question, and then we'll wrap this up. Thank you for hanging in there. So, Kathleen, you can ask, and I think we're going to begin with Damon, I believe.
Have you read the book, Autopsy, the Democratic Party in Crisis? We have one of the authors in the audience here. And if not, will you read it this week?
I just want to warn, in fairness, I want to warn all of the panel that Pia Gallegos is sitting right over there, and she's pretty tough, so, but she's one of the authors. You will not be kicked out of the primary if you say no and you're going to read it next week or when you have some time. So, it's only 32 pages. In case I change the answer, you have to read it next week. So,
Pia has brought it up to me twice already. I've looked at parts of it, not the whole thing. And yes, I'll look at it.
I have not read it, and I will read it this week. And since you're here, does that mean we get the honor of getting a signed copy? That'd be a real treat.
Yes, and I want to thank Pia for the extraordinary work that goes into that report. It's incredible.
It is really great work. Yes, I've read it. It's right here online, democraticautopsy.org. You can find it right now, too.
Yes, absolutely.
I've not read it. I will read it right after I finish reading a book called